Nicole, welcome into the back room.
Thank you for having me.
So, back in March, you wrote a powerful piece titled Some Americans Have Already Been Caught in Trump's Immigration Dragnet. More will be. In it, you highlighted cases in which U.S. citizens were mistakenly detained in Trump's ICE raids. You talked about fishing expeditions and arrest quotas. That was 6 months ago, which in politics, especially in Trump time, is a lifetime. Things were really bleak then. Give us an update on the situation today.
I don't think people would fairly say that it's gotten better. It's I think that we're still seeing increasing levels of immigration enforcement that are going into communities and affecting people in ways of like citizens being arrested or, high school kids on the way to school watching someone break a car window open right in front of them and drag a family out. Like that's what we're seeing right now with the level of immigration enforcement. It has not gotten better in the last 6 months. I think more Americans than ever before are seeing these types of things happen to them and their loved ones and their neighbors.
Yeah, and 2 weeks ago, you co-wrote the piece, which is a great title. We'll smash the fucking window and drag him out. Give us a little deeper insight into what's been going on here.
Well, around the same time that I was writing about the number of US citizens who were getting caught up in this expanded immigration enforcement, I also started noticing a tactic that even though I had covered immigration before, I had covered immigration in the first Trump administration, I hadn't seen before, which was immigration officers stopping someone in their car and eventually smashing the window open to either drag them out through the window or reach in and unlock the car that way. And many of these were getting caught on video. I started noticing some of these videos pop up. My coworker, Mackenzie Funk, on the other side of the country in Washington, was starting to see it. We saw it in our hometowns. We saw it. Just everywhere we were covering immigration enforcement, and we had a lot of questions, which was like, why? Is this only happening because people film things more often now, or are we seeing a new focus on a tactic that really shows how far immigration officers are willing to go to meet really aggressive quotas and to detain as many people as possible? And we were really confused about whether or not it was legal. And so we set out to find that out and ended up tracking. We're easily over more than 50. Have received a lot of tips since the story of these types of arrests happening all over the country, to U.S. citizens, to people with their children in the car, people without extensive criminal records. It's just I think it's an indicator of a just an acceleration of really aggressive immigration enforcement and I think, focus on completing these arrests by any means possible.
And we know that Donald Trump is extremely transactional. He loves numbers, right? So the quotas that you talk about, is that like the 3,000 per day? I don't know if that was deportations or arrests or a combination of the two, but is that the sort of thing you're talking about? Like he has said this has to happen, and then Tom Homan, the border czar, he then says to the rank and file, "Go do it," and it's just become an indiscriminate, but also very cruel process.
Yeah, I think there was this very widely reported number, which I do have to say that the administration is now denying exists. That they said there are no quotas, but there's very extensive reporting.
Which means there are quotas.
There's very extensive reporting citing these quotas. But yeah, about directing people to get 3,000 arrests a day by any means possible. There's been quite a lot of talk about wanting to deport 1 million people this year, and trying to stay on pace for that. But yeah, those like 3,000 arrests a day, and at the same time that the administration, who, while saying we are getting rid of the worst, also saying if you are in this country illegally, then we will deport you. And really telling people, like, we don't care if you have extensive ties to your community. We don't care if you have an entire family of US citizens around you, or children with severe medical disabilities who need you. We will deport you if we can find you and arrest you, regardless of your criminal background, even though we're saying that we're prioritizing the worst of the worst.
And it should be noted that Trump's immigration policies are extremely unpopular with the American people. You know, immigration was one of his signature issues, and he is completely underwater with the American people, and that includes, you know, Republicans and independents as well as Democrats.
Yeah, I've been reading those polls as well, and I honestly think I chalk it up to the fact that when you are trying to hit these really aggressive quotas, um, the truth is that it requires a lot of resources to go after folks with extensive criminal records who are the worst of the worst. It's far easier to arrest families on their way to church. It's far easier to wait outside of immigration court, to arrest people who are showing up to court or to ICE check-ins and following all the rules, so you know exactly where they live, exactly where they work. And it's easier to go to workplaces where people are working and filing taxes and, again, participating in society. And people have seen that. And whether they've seen, the people that they've worked with who they've always respected, they know that they're taking care of their family, getting arrested to them next door, or they are watching a really violent arrest play out right in their street, in their neighborhood. Like I talked to one girl she and her mom filmed the arrest of what turned out to be a US citizen and several other members in Rochester, New York. They were just at their grandma's house, like cleaning out their grandmother's house when this played out in front of them. They're not the kind who follow, ICE trucks around to document arrests. They were just going about their daily lives. And so people seeing this happen in their neighborhoods, or just like watching these really horrific videos all over social media, I think it has a pretty strong effect. I think that even people who voted for advanced immigration enforcement didn't really think it was going to look like this.
Oh, I think you're 100% right. I try to maintain the belief that Americans, for the most part, are good, decent people,
Mhm.
that while they might want a strong border, they don't want cruelty in order to achieve it. And that's how this administration is implementing Trump's policies. In my community, there's a young guy, 23 years old, he has his own landscaping business,
Mhm.
pays taxes, doing the right thing, and looks like he's going to be deported despite all kinds of efforts to keep him here. When he's doing a lawn, he's not doing a liberal lawn, right? He's doing everybody's lawn.
Mhm.
And I think you hit on something where, like, at some point, people are like, wait a second, he's a good kid. What the hell's
Mhm.
going on? This is not what I didn't want to send him back.
Mhm.
That's just unfair. It's cruel. And I think that's why Trump is underwater, because this is not the promise he made. The promise he made was to go after the criminals. And it doesn't surprise me that what you say, that, it is more time consuming and costly to actually do that than to just go to a Home Depot. And, his policies are also just so riddled with contradiction. Like, for
Mhm.
example, these people are all lazy. Let's
Mhm.
go to Home Depot where they're looking for work, right?
Mhm.
Or they're just illegal coming here and they don't want to do anything right. But let's go to the immigration office where they're actually following the law and trying to do
Yeah.
this the right way. And I think those are the things that people are looking at, whether they're blue or red, and going, this doesn't wash with me. This is not America.
Mhm.
Because at some point, you've got to stop saying undocumented immigrants or illegal aliens, and just they're human beings. And
Mhm.
I think most Americans see these folks as human beings, and seeing them being treated with such disrespect and cruelty, just abject cruelty.
Yeah, and I think too what's really affecting people is seeing, honestly, like, people being deported and being arrested and being deported really as a as such a clear result of um our leaders' inability to compromise on any type of immigration reform, because you're seeing right now so many people who are being deported who have been here for 30 or 40 years, and they're so integrated into society, and people who maybe don't know a lot about the immigration system say, well, they've been here for 30 years. Why haven't they become a citizen? Why haven't they become legalized? And the truth is that once you overstay a visa or come into the United States without inspection, it's really, really, there are very few avenues that can allow you to legalize your status. And any that are available can cost a lot of money and time. And so, seeing people who for 30 or 40 years have been stuck in this limbo now being deported, I think is really affecting people's perspective of all of this as well.
Yeah, and your reporting definitely has had impact because in that article I just mentioned a couple of weeks ago, ProPublica has been attacked by the White House as a, quote, left-wing rag that is shamelessly doing the bidding of criminal, illegal aliens. And it also referred to ICE agents as heroes. Your response to that?
I mean, I think that the thing that makes me laugh a little bit about that response is that comes after months and months and so many emails. I sent them a 5-page memo at one point with every single case and many that we didn't end up mentioning in our story, simply because, especially when you're like covering these like really violent arrests and you just have one video of the situation, we don't know everything that happened. We don't know always what happened before, what happened after. Was there a reason that ICE was decided to use such extreme force in this particular arrest? And so genuinely going to them with, can you explain some of these? Like, we know that we probably don't have the full story. We know that you have law enforcement priorities and there are, reasons why you may decide to arrest someone this way. Can you tell us? And so that's the response we got after, asking for like, please share your side of the story. And also too, after asking for interviews and saying, we understand this is not against the law. We understand it's not against policy, but can you explain why we're seeing an increase? And is there anything that you think people should know about this? And not getting an answer beyond the one that you read.
Well, we know that Donald Trump and everyone who works for him are pathological liars. And specifically with Trump and the White House, every time he opens his mouth, it's either projection or confession. So we know what the truth is simply by their denials.
Mm-hmm.
So it's great that you riled them up and they were compelled to react that way. There have been various egregious actions of Trump 2.0, including and involving due process, habeas corpus, illegal search and detention, mistaken detention and deportation, violent ICE tactics, racial profiling, alligator Alcatraz, family separations, and defying court orders. Has anything improved?
Oh, that's a good question. I mean, I think it's difficult to answer that question because, like many other areas of Trump administration policy, there is quite a lot happening all over the place, all at the same time at light speed. But I think
I've concluded that there's
okay.
an actual person at the White House whose title is Director of Flood the Zone.
Yeah, I mean, the most days I'm just sitting there like, how does anyone have the energy to enact all these
Exhausting.
different policies? I can't even read them fast enough. But I mean, I think that there are different areas where I think people are maybe successfully pushing back or gaining some level of due process. I mean, a significant part of California now is under a temporary restraining order banning or at least severely limiting immigration agents from conducting these like so-called roving patrols, largely because those roving patrols were as the groups that sued for this were alleged that it was rife with racial profiling. picked up a ton of US citizens who, if these were targeted enforcement actions, you would think would not be picked up. And so there, and, we have seen a drop in that level of activity, but not entirely gone. I mean, there's Border Patrol just did a pretty prominent raid right outside of the governor's press conference last night.
Mhm.
That is unclear if it's following the terms of the court order. So I think that's certainly something that has changed and is significant considering how large of an immigrant population a state like California has. But I think also too, what I've noticed is really, I mean, just really like the attitudes towards immigration have changed pretty significantly. I don't remember this much pushback on immigrants being arrested in their communities and deported in the first Trump administration. I think these types of really aggressive policies do tend to bring out more people who maybe would have said, hey, I'm just, like, it's the law. The law is the law. We've got to, people have got to follow the law. But now they're seeing what that looks like in their communities and who it's affecting, and it's no longer acceptable to them. So,
Mhm. And there was that pause on construction at Alligator
yes,
Alcatraz,
that's
so
correct. Yes.
that's something, you
Hmm.
know.
There's always
Uh,
lots of court orders flying around,
right, right.
restricting some of this.
So you note that arrest quotas for agents make it more likely that citizens get caught up in enforcement sweeps. How are these quotas structured, if you know that? And what accountability exists to protect our civic freedoms in this country with those quotas as a backdrop?
Yeah, I mean, I haven't done much reporting on like specifically on the quotas themselves, but it is what we have seen is, especially since before the extra funding went through, that will be adding a significant number of new immigration officers. It meant that ICE and Border Patrol were bringing in a number of officers from agencies across the federal government in order to hit these targets. So much of the federal law enforcement right now is directed towards immigration arrests. You've got, and you can just see them in the very thin slice that we looked at when it came to these broken windows arrests. You see DEA officers. You see ATF, folks who are usually doing, alcohol and gun investigations, FBI agents out there breaking windows for folks who don't have a criminal record. So that that's what a priority this is for the federal government right now, which is that they will be bringing in officers who presumably are usually working on a very different portfolio than arresting a mom in front of her daughter. But yeah, I think that's one of the ways that that's playing out. And again, it's just when you have a quota for anything, it tends to encourage speed more than accuracy. And that's how you end up getting people arrested who normally would not be the target of such like an extensive law enforcement operation. How you end up catching US citizens, but also too, just because I think something that the administration says quite frequently is that, if we're that they're quite willing to go into communities to make these arrests, whereas before, and they often will say, like, in states that cooperate with immigration enforcement, we get people from the jails and the prisons, and we don't have to go into communities. um and so I think that's also what you just end up seeing, is that you are far more likely to see the person next to you, who is next to you in the grocery store, get tackled in the parking lot um, of a state of Rose in California, which is something that happened to a U.S. citizen, um, and compared to what you would have before, because in order to meet these aggressive quotas, you have to go out into the communities, and you have to go looking for people that are going about their daily lives, and that's really disruptive.
And how have those communities and cities especially sanctuary cities. How have they responded? Is there a lot of pushback? I mean, yesterday we saw this order by Attorney General Pam Bondi in D.C. Not only has Trump taken over the police force and sent in the National Guard, but now she's appointed an emergency police commissioner, which I heard this morning that the Attorney General has filed suit because it's just not legal.
Mhm.
But one of the things that they're trying to do is to rescind DC's sanctuary city status.
Mhm.
What have you seen on the local and state level to push back on all this?
Yeah, I mean, I think cities are responding in different ways, and also like the city governments are definitely responding in often quieter ways than their residents maybe. But
Hmm.
yeah, like I think it's interesting to look at LA compared to DC, and LA is many of the local agencies in LA are pushing back really aggressively against against immigration enforcement that they say that they do not want and did not call for. Whether it's I think the major school district in Los Angeles is now increasing like local patrols in an effort to try to protect students and parents from being
Right.
picked up on their way to school. And certainly the governor, the attorney general of California, and the mayor of Los Angeles is also very vocal about what the pushback that they're doing. But I also think too, it's a mix of some of these communities are still, there's definitely a lot of pushback, but some of these communities are pretty were got hit pretty hard early on when it comes to immigration enforcement. I've been thinking a lot about the Boston suburbs because we just published another video actually with one of the there are so many teenagers who filmed some of these most violent arrests and with the high school student who happened to be filming the arrest of a father on Mother's Day on their way to church. And in front of you can hear his children crying as he's arrested. And so this high school student, when I was talking to him about this, he was saying, um, ever since that arrest, and even so, as they've continued in this in those very heavily immigrant suburbs of the Boston area, that you can feel in the streets how scared people are. I mean, people are certainly pushing back. People are certainly, I mean, in that video, you can hear this high school student who's just watched, federal officers descend on one car, so angry and yelling at them, which is like certainly a level of bravery I don't know if I would have in that moment. But he's talked about like you can feel in the streets how scared people are. And I think that while people are pushing back, you also just can't overemphasize how much this has absolutely like just desiccated some neighborhoods that are people are canceling festivals and canceling upcoming Hispanic Heritage Month things. You can't go to the grocery store now or a flea market without being concerned that it might be your last trip outside of the house. So there's a lot of pushback, but a lot of people really are just trying to hang on and sometimes are staying incredibly close to home in an effort to stay safe.
And in your reporting, have you observed any institutional resistance from within DHS or ICE itself?
Yeah, I mean, I have to be honest, like, I'm sure there may be my reporting hasn't mostly focused on that, so I wouldn't feel comfortable like talking about that.
Hmm.
But there is some, there's always going to be a concern when I think two things are happening: when policies are changing and when there are aggressive quotas that may change law enforcement priorities from things like going after human trafficking rings to arresting immigrants without criminal records. There's generally usually a response to that, but I can't speak to any of that at this time.
Because everything is so visual. We at home watch TV, we see these masked dudes, doing all kinds of things, worst case scenarios that we've been talking about, or just the presence of them. And it just makes you wonder, like, do any of them just go, what the hell am I doing here? This is not my job. I'm not, like the thing at Gavin Newsom's presser yesterday. It's like, when did ICE agents go from being an immigration enforcement force to being Trump's personal political police force, like to intimidate an opponent, like the governor of the largest state in the country. It just makes you wonder, do any of these people go, this is not what I'm paid to do?
Yeah.
There has to be some degree of that, I guess.
Yeah. I mean, I think that it's going to be interesting to see how easily or quickly the Department of Homeland Security is able to hire, I think one of the numbers was 10,000 new ICE officers because um, staffing and morale was low going into this year, going into this summer. It's a difficult job that now is very much in the spotlight. And so it would be interesting to see if standards remain the same, they are able to recruit the number of officers that they want to, because I speaking for myself personally, I don't know if I would particularly enjoy getting yelled at every day by random passersby, as you see in videos and everything everywhere. I mean, it's not really a job that is always welcomed by members of the public right now.
Yeah, but it's such an interesting thing to think about because I'm sure there will be no trouble finding people who want to get paid well, but who, you mentioned standards, when the standards are lowered to the point where they'll hire anyone just to give them a uniform and take orders. And that's where you start to connect the dots to all things throughout history. And it's like, that's how Hitler put together his stormtroopers. These guys weren't college graduates who were altruistic. They were thugs. And that they became his police force. And we're seeing that a little bit now. So it makes you wonder, like, if they need to hire more, who the hell are they going to hire? And what's their mentality going to be? And how is Trump going to utilize them? And are they going to care or not care? It's just a very precarious place that we are in this country right now.
Yeah, and you asked earlier, and I forgot to answer about, what type of recourse people have, what level, if something happens, or if, especially as we're watching sometimes these very violent arrests that we ask, how can this possibly be legal? Like, what recourse people have. What can be really difficult is, of course, wearing masks. It can make it really difficult to know who to even report for maybe aggressive or excessive force, or the other things that people have reported immigration officers before. You know, the offices that usually handle those types of complaints have been gutted. There's very few staff left to take a complaint like that. And then on top of that, it's really hard to sue a federal officer. And it's, some of the families who have filed claims, like the Boston family that I was just talking about, they filed a claim saying, citing not just physical distress and damages to their family, but also really emotional damages. There was a toddler in the car. There was a 12-year-old with severe disabilities in the car who had to witness what happened to their father. In the lawsuit, something that I always think about is they said that their toddler now tells people unprompted, police broke the window and dragged dad out. And that's, how do you, that's something that's happening to so many children right now.
Sure.
And yet for all of that, it's really unclear how that claim may be able to significantly help that family, past people who have filed lawsuits over a broken window arrest or a violent arrest like this usually get like, $25,000, $30,000. And it can't really do much to stop the deportation process at all. They filed that claim, and a couple of days later, their father was already deported to Mexico. So
Yeah.
it's hard when the people who are experiencing some of these aggressive enforcement actions, and no police force is perfect, and so there are going to be lines overstepped no matter what. If they're if they're moved out of the country and deported so quickly, you have to really ask who's going to be able to hold any of these masked officers who you can't tell who they are, accountable for what they're doing. All the witnesses are deported, honestly.
Yeah, it's a really awful situation. My last question, what has the impact of Trump's draconian immigration policies been on the economy and specifically on states out west?
Yeah, that's a great that's a great question because I spent most of last year in the run up to the election writing about labor and immigration, and I learned that I learned a lot, but I also learned how much people do not understand how immigrants are really essential parts of almost every industry now. I spend a lot of time writing about shipbuilding for government ships and how many undocumented immigrants were building ships for the Coast Guard, for the Navy, which is not something that you like people traditionally think of as an industry with a lot of immigrants, but it's true because the truth of the matter is that immigrants are pretty essential parts of almost every blue collar industry right now. Um, Americans, for whatever reason, for the last several years, have not been drawn to blue collar jobs, even well paying blue collar jobs. Some of these welding jobs will pay 40, $50 an hour, and it's still hard to find people who are trained for that. But then at the same time, people in some of the more service oriented jobs that are really difficult, like working in nursing homes or caregiving or childcare. Um, so many of those people are immigrants who have been deported or who are at risk of losing their status as different countries lose their temporary protected status and the work authorization that comes with that. But it is, I think we still have yet to see what happens when it comes to like deporting and detaining so many workers that this country relies on. But there was actually really interesting reporting out of, I was just reading, coming out of the University of California in Merced, where they looked at the impact of just those few months of raids in California, and that workforce participation, the number of workers reporting that they had work that month during those raids dropped significantly, and not just for non-citizen workers. U.S. citizens reported that they didn't have as much work, they didn't work as many days. And these researchers there said that just looking at California in those few months, that they had not seen that level of drop in reported work since like it was reaching levels of COVID and the Great Recession. And that's of course like a very, very small segment, but given the level of immigration enforcement that was focused in on LA, and it's pretty telling, I believe. And so I think we're going to continue to see some pretty devastating economic impacts. I think it's probably too early to predict, but I just don't know what happens when you deport and detain people that so many different sectors of our economy rely on.
Yeah, well, I think we've started several weeks ago. We started to see it a little bit because Trump and his cruelty and xenophobia and racism. I think he started out just thinking like, oh, this is just about helpless black and brown people. And then he got some phone calls from his rich pals who own farms, et cetera. And then he did that carve out, which I'm not even sure what the status of that is. But I think it's starting to trickle up, at least in the administration, like, oh, yeah, this can hurt our friends. But I think what most people need to understand, because there's so much lies and bullshit that comes out of this administration, but it's like every undocumented immigrant who works, they pay taxes
Yeah.
and they get nothing in return because they
Mhm.
can't file for benefits. They don't get Medicare. They don't get Social Security payments. They don't get anything that the rest of us get from the government when we pay taxes. And I think people really need to understand, even the most myopic Trumpers need to understand the impact, the economic impact. Forget the fact that the other thing is bullshit too. It's like, well, they're taking away jobs. Their
Mhm.
jobs Americans don't want.
Mhm.
Okay. Americans are lazy and spoiled. They don't want to be, picking grapes
Mhm.
or taking care of other people's kids.
Mhm.
And so I think people are starting to connect all these dots, which again, I think is why he's underwater with his immigration policy.
Yeah, and again, I think it's also too just because like immigrants in this country are not just picking grapes and taking care of children. I mean, immigrants have been a part of the fabric of our country for a really long time, for the reason that we are a huge country with
Yeah.
states with economies larger than most world countries. Like, I don't think people who are really so aggressively anti-immigrant and don't want any immigrants in the country at all realize that that inflow of immigration is part of what keeps our country running decade after decade,
Absolutely.
you know?
Well, people forget that too, that we're a nation that's been built by immigrants. We all either come from immigrants or are immigrants ourselves. There is no Native American unless it's a real Native American. So when people say like, "Oh, they're not real Americans," well, neither are you. You know, like we all come from immigrants.
Mhm.
So, but hopefully the polls and the sentiment that's out there might be some sign that we're hitting an inflection point, and maybe, you know, if the courts can continue to do their thing, and also the people, we the people, just got to get out there and keep fighting, you know, against this kind of tyranny. Nicole, thank you so much for coming on. This was a great conversation, and do come back.
Thank you for having me.
Alrighty, take care.